Welcome to the Humanist Club in the Villages. I'm Bo Goldsmith. Do we have anybody that is new to this meeting here today?
Yeah, they're coming.
Welcome. Nice to see you. You're most welcome. This club usually has a speaker meeting like the one today on the first and third Sundays of the month. And on the second Sunday of the month, we have a meeting that we call Social Sunday that Pam Cresswell runs as a topic to facilitate discussion amongst small tables. The point of it all with the meetings is to share information that we can discuss in a civil and rational fashion. My personal favorite short definition of humanism comes from Kurt Vonnegut, who was president of the American Humanism Association in the 1990s. And he said the essence of humanism is trying to behave decently without expectation of reward or punishment after you are dead. That resonates a lot with me and with a lot of humans. All right. We do not have dues for this club. We do, however, request donations to cover the costs of coffee and cookies, other refreshments, as well as other incidental club expenses, none of which go to the host, I'm sad to say. Okay? All right. If you would silence your cell phones, that would be courteous for the speaker and for the discussion. We'd appreciate that. The next meeting of the Humanist Club here will actually be next week. Next Sunday will be the fourth Sunday, so we won't have it. And it will be on the 3rd. And that will be at the same time, 10 a.m., but it will be at a different place. It will actually be at the McCall Recreation Center because this place gets closed down for voting on that day. So it's at McCall at 10, and Ron Youngs is going to talk about the origins of the biblical creation myth, which I think should be interesting. The next Freethinker meeting will be this coming Thursday at 8 or 3:30. Bud, do you want to?
Okay. This Thursday at 3:30 at Aviary Recreation Center, we'll have the next Freethinkers Club South. The speaker is going to be the same guy that's giving lectures here today, Larry Martin, and he's going to do something very different. The topic is Urban Berlin, His Life and Music, and you'll hear the 25 #1 hits that Urban Berlin had, and some of the 17 musicals, Broadway musicals that he put on. Everyone comes out of that humming music to a very entertaining presentation, and I recommend it. The next meeting of the Freethinkers North, which is at Bridgeport at 2:30 on the 14th of November. And the speaker that is Dr. Frank Manista, who is a career diplomat, and he's going to be talking about Ukraine. The topic is Ukraine, what now? I'll give you an update of what's going on in the Ukraine war.
Thank you, Bud. All right, today, as Bud indicated, we are fortunate to have with us Larry Martin, Dr. Larry Martin, who apparently following getting fed up with treating pink puffers in pulmonary practice, retired since then has written, what, 25 books?
Whatever.
Yeah. Oh, come on a variety of topics, and is a frequent and very popular speaker here in the village. Today he's going to talk to us about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict before and after the epical events of October 23. This obviously is a topic that can arouse a lot of reaction. So I want to say at the outset that this is the Humanism Club. Our core value is people. All people. This is not a forum for expressions of hatred toward groups of people whose tribal identifications are different than your own. Questions and comments that are civil, I heartily encourage and urge you to participate with in our discussion. All right. Larry, please.
Thank you for coming. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
I'm going to be presenting a lot of information. My feeling is that to understand the Gaza war, we need to know the whole history of the Holy Land going back well over 100 years. This just shows a map of the Holy Land and point out that the Jews and the non-Jews in this area of the Holy Land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea is about the same. The Palestinians in West Bank and Gaza are about 5 million people. Israel as a country is 9.4 million people, of which about 3/4 are Jewish. So I just want to put this in perspective. Israel is surrounded by a couple of dozen Arab countries, all of whom in the past have been anti-Israel, some of whom have now made peace. In addition to the Arab countries, there's Turkey and Iran. The people in those countries are not technically Arabs, but they are anti-Israel. So when you add the Arab countries plus Turkey and Iran, you can see how this small country of Israel is surrounded by mostly enemies. It's a 100-year war, more than a 100-year war between the Jews and the Arabs in the Holy Land. And I want to begin by talking about these people. Amin al-Husseini, who was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem from 1897 to 1974. Yasser Arafat, of course, was the head of the PLO. He died in 2004. And Mahmoud Abbas is still currently the head of the PLO in the West Bank. This picture of Amin al-Husseini, to me, helps explain the history of the conflict between Jews and Arabs in the Holy Land. Amin al-Husseini was Grand Mufti of Jerusalem from 1922 to 1937. That means he was a religious and political leader. He led or instigated massacres of the Jews in the 1920s and 30s. In 1937, under his leadership, he rejected Britain's Peel Commission for a two-state proposal. Between 1941 and 1945, he was in Berlin, where he collaborated with Hitler to implement the final solution in the Holy Land. Had Hitler won the war in Europe, there would literally be no Jews or no Israel in Israel. In 1947, he spearheaded rejection of the United Nations two-state proposal. So his no Jews in the Holy Land set the goal for all future negotiations and encounters. So there's really no need to mince words. The history of the Israeli-Arab conflict in the Middle East really can best be understood by the singular Arab goal of leaders and their acolytes, no matter what faction, that is to get rid of all the Jews between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. PLO, PA, Hamas, Fatah, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, Husseini, Arafat, Abbas, the Intifadas, the BDS movement, UNRWA, which I'll talk about, the United Nations Relief Organization, and all the pro-Palestinian non-governmental organizations. They all have the same goal: no Israel, no Jews between the river and the sea. This singular goal, no Israel and no Jews between the river and the sea, really helps explain the repeated failure of negotiations for a two-state solution. It helps explain the double standard of United Nations NGOs in condemning Israel for human rights abuses more often than all other countries of the world combined. It helps explain the BDS movement, that's the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement popular on American campuses, and its true goal. It helps explain the United Nations Relief Agency for Palestinians, which has a unique definition of refugees that applies only to Palestinians. It helps explain the perversion of terms used against Israel: genocide, apartheid, colonialist, occupier, Nazi-like, and so forth. And it helps explain why the type of government Israel has, right-wing, left-wing, center this or that, does not matter. Okay, I know what you're thinking. I've made my point. Can we move on? So I do want to repeat, appreciating this goal of the Arab leaders of the last 100 years, since Amin al-Husseini, is essential in any discussion of the conflict's history. No Israel, no Jews between the river and the sea. There are four major Arab factions surrounding Israel with a shared goal of annihilation. In Gaza, we have Hamas, which we all know about, and it's recognized as a terrorist group by the United States. In Gaza, we have the Iran-sponsored Islamic Jihad movement, again recognized as a terrorist group by the United States. In southern Lebanon, we have Hezbollah, also Iran-sponsored, recognized as a terrorist group by the United States. And on the West Bank, we have the Palestinian Liberation Organization, established in the 1960s, which currently is not designated a terrorist group by the United States. So three of the groups, of the four groups immediately surrounding Israel, are recognized terrorist groups by the United States. And one more Iranian-sponsored terrorist group that seeks to destroy Israel, the Houthis in Yemen, which have blocked shipping in the Red Sea, which you all are aware of, I'm sure. So Iran and its proxies chant death to Israel, and they also chant death to America, and they mean it. Islamic terrorist groups are not just a threat to Israel, but a threat to America, which I'll talk more about. So Yasser Arafat founded the Fatah political party in 1957, and he was a staunch anti-Zionist. Then he was chairman of the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, from 1969 to 2004. And during this period, he was behind frequent terrorist attacks on Israelis. He rejected President Clinton's Camp David peace initiative in 2000. Instead, while he was there, it's now known that he was plotting the Second Intifada, which is an uprising, which started a few weeks after the Camp David talks. He died in 2004 in a Paris hospital. Mahmoud Abbas, who was born in 1935, is chairman of the PLO in the West Bank since 2005, so now in his 20th year of a 4-year term. People can get very confused about the PA and the PLO, and I myself was confused. The PA was established in 1994 to govern the West Bank and Gaza. The PLO precedes that, and the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, is recognized by the United Nations as representative of all the Palestinians all over the world, whereas the PA, the Palestine Authority, is confined to the West Bank only. But their goals are indistinguishable. He's head of, Abbas is head of both, and so whether you read PLO or PA, it's all the same. Get rid of all the Jews from the river to the sea. He turned down an offer for a two-state solution in 2008 and made no counter-offers. His PLO is actually in opposition to Hamas, and they were kicked out of Gaza in 2007, the PLO was. He runs the Pay for Slave program, $400 million a year is paid to terrorists who attack Jews, or if they're killed, then to the family of the terrorists. He's actually widely perceived as corrupt and ineffective, but no election has been held in the West Bank for fear Hamas might prevail, as it did in Gaza in 2006. So now I present a brief timeline of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict from the 1880s to 1950. And your first thought might be, does history even matter? And this has been a very common topic of discussion. Person A's history is completely different than person B's history. But wait a minute, they have the same facts, but they interpret them completely differently. And in fact, that's part of the problem. The history can always be interpreted to favor one side or the other. So I'm going to present some of the history. And keep in mind that those who want Israel gone will interpret it very differently from those who want Israel to survive and live in peace with the Palestinians. We'll start with the 1880s. The Russian and European Jews began migrating to the Holy Land to escape pogroms and widespread persecution. Before this migration, there are both native Jews and native Arabs living in the land. In the 1990s in Vienna, Theodor Herzl founded the modern Zionist movement, a direct result of European anti-Semitism and his perceived need for a Jewish state. In the early 1900s, more European Jews emigrated to the Holy Land, and the local Arabs began revolting over this encroachment. Now, at the time, the land was part of the Ottoman or Turkish Empire, and the Jews paid for the land that they built on. So what you see in green here, over here, is the Ottoman Empire. There was no Palestine at all. The Ottomans controlled the land between the river and the sea that we call the Holy Land. After World War I, the Ottoman Empire, Turkey lost the war in World War I. The Ottoman Empire was dissolved, and Great Britain took control of the region in what they called a mandate. It included Palestine, the current Holy Land, and Transjordan, which was separated off from the rest of the country, of the land, into a country of Jordan in 1946, leaving only the area now that we're commonly calling between the river and the sea. Jordan is a separate country. In the 1920s and 1930s, there was more Jewish immigration to Palestine. This led to frequent Arab revolts and massacres of Jews. The Jewish paramilitary Haganah was established to combat Arab attacks. In 1933, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, and as more Jews sought to escape Europe, Britain clamped down on immigration, a policy encouraged by Arab leaders, particularly Amin al-Husseini. In 1936, there was a 3-year revolt. Thousands of Jews were killed in Palestine. Britain authorized the Peel Commission to try to resolve the conflict. And what you see here is the map that the Britain and the Peel Commission thought would work for a 2-state solution. One for Jews and one for Arabs. So that the Jewish state would be here in orange. And the rest would be the Arab state. And the green area would be controlled by an international coalition. It would not belong to either. That would include Jerusalem. It would not include either. Would not be owned by either the Arabs or the Jews. And if that was rejected, as I stated earlier. Then we had the outbreak of World War II in 1939. Immigration of Jews was closed throughout most of the world, including the United States. The passenger ship SS St. Louis came to North America, stopping first in Cuba and then coming to the shore of the United States, and was turned away. Roosevelt would not let it land. With 900 Jewish refugees, the ship had to return to Western Europe, and ultimately 254 of its passengers were killed in the Holocaust. And that shows you some of the anti-Semitism that was present, even in the United States in this year. And I said earlier, in 1941 to 45, Amin al-Husseini moved to Germany, where he conspired with the Nazis. He stayed throughout the war, and then he moved to Egypt. World War II ended in 1945, and the full extent of the Holocaust was revealed, 66 million Jews killed. In 1946, Jordan achieved independence, and now, in 1946, Britain controlled only the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, the Holy Land. In 1947, November 29th, the UN voted to establish a separate Jewish and Arab state, Resolution 181, and the Arabs rejected this plan. Ben-Gurion declared the State of Israel in May 14th, 1948, the new nation of Israel. But the Arabs did not. What do? On the next day, May 15th, 5 Arab countries invaded Israel with a promise to destroy the new country. Israel prevailed in the war, and an estimated 750,000 Arabs were displaced from their homes because of the war, and they now live in borders outside the borders of Israel. At the same time, 850,000 Jews were forced to leave Arab-controlled countries around the Mediterranean. Most of them migrated to Israel, but many migrated to Europe and some to the United States. In 1949, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine, UNRWA, was established for Palestinian refugees only. In 1950, another organization from the UN, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, was created for the rest of the planet's refugees. Thus, two UN agencies with totally different definitions of refugees. Now, the history can always be interpreted, as I stated earlier, to favor one side or the other. Pro-Israel people will say the Jews have been in the Holy Land for thousands of years, well before the founding of Islam in the 7th century AD. Jewish migration was legal, and before World War I, land was bought from the Arabs under Ottoman rule. Until the 1960s, Palestinians were not a recognized political entity. There was no country of Palestine. There were no Palestinians as a separate political entity. The 1947 UN proposal for partition fully justifies Israel's decision to declare a nation state in May of '48. The Arabs could have done the same, but chose to launch a war of annihilation instead. And Jews desire to live in peace with their Arab neighbors. That's the pro-Israel position. The anti-Israel position states that Jews were only a tiny minority in the Holy Land before European immigration began, and they have no legal right to any land occupied by Arabs. Jewish migration exemplifies settler colonialism, migration to confiscate land of indigenous people. The 1947 UN proposal for partition had no legal basis, since both sides did not agree on partition. Israel's unilateral declaration of statehood was ipso facto illegal. And quoting the Quran, Islam does not share land with followers of any other religion. That's the anti-Israel position. Furthermore, each side has its own definitions of common words. Israel says that genocide is what the Nazis did to the Jews in World War II, in no way applicable to Israel's attack on Gaza. The anti-Israel crowd says genocide is what the Israelis have been doing to the Palestinians in Gaza. The pro-Israel group says apartheid is a policy of white South Africans toward the blacks in the 20th century, and in no way is applicable to Israel, either to its own citizens or in the West Bank. The anti-Israel crowd says Israel's policies as regards to the Palestinians is apartheid. The pro-Israel group says that occupation is legal when the land so occupied is under no sovereign nation, referring to the West Bank. The UN resolutions against Israel have no moral or legal validity. Anti-Israel group says the occupation is illegal based on numerous United Nations General Assembly resolutions. Finally, the pro-Israel group says that the refugees, the group as defined by United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, whereas the anti-Israel group says refugees are as defined by UNRWA. Two different interpretations of terms you will hear a lot. And when you hear those terms, you might disagree with the person. Say, please give me your definition of this term, rather than just blatantly agreeing or disagreeing. So we have UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, and we have UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. UNRWA uniquely defines all Palestinians as refugees, not just if they left during the war, but as descendants and relatives of displaced Palestinians in perpetuity. In 1948-49, the number was 750,000. Today, UNRWA counts an estimated 6 million refugees, with actually only about 25,000 are actual refugees. The rest are descendants and all their relatives. So again, UNRWA is for Palestinians only. And many UNRWA workers are in bed with Hamas, has been shown extensively since the war began in Gaza. UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, applies only to people displaced from their homelands, not to their descendants, non-displaced spouses, or distant relatives. And it's an agency for Africa, the Americas, Asia, Pacific region, Europe, and all the Middle East except the Palestinians. In 2024, this year, 136 countries come under UNHCR and 111 million refugees. Why the difference? The goal of UNRWA is to grow the refugee population, to create pressure on Israel and impossible demands in peace negotiations. So, for example, in earlier peace negotiations for two-state solution, the Palestinians would claim demand right of return. Well, if Israel agreed to that, there'd be no more Israel. So they would say no, and then people would think, oh, see, Israel's intransigent. They won't agree to the return of refugees. So that's why UNRWA was established. So let's skip ahead to the next 7.5 decades. 2 more multi-country wars with the Arab goal to eliminate Israel. The Six-Day War in 67 and the Yom Kippur War in 73. Then began Israeli settlements in the West Bank after the 1967 war. Before 1967, when Jordan controlled the West Bank, there were no Israeli settlements. There was ongoing terrorism, 2 intifadas, suicide bombers, incessant missile attacks from Gaza, Hezbollah attacks from southern Lebanon, 2.5 major peace agreements, and then the Hamas massacre of October 7th last year, and the ensuing war in Gaza and Israeli-Lebanon border. The 2.5 major peace agreements, in 79, Israel and Egypt had a peace agreement, and Saddam was assassinated in 1981 for this effort, which sent a message to other Arabs who might want to agree to make peace with Israel that, be careful, you could be assassinated. In 1994, there was an agreement with Jordan, which is held to today. So if you visit Israel as a tourist, you now can go to Jordan, visit Petra and some of the other sites in Jordan, no problem. And in 1985, there was the Oslo II Accords with the PLO. To me, this is the half the peace agreement. And that's when the Palestinian Authority was created to govern Gaza and parts of the West Bank. There's a lot of information on this matter. Basically, this shows the West Bank, and it's divided into 3 areas. So when someone talks about the West Bank, about something that's happening, you need to be specific. Is it happening in Area A, Area B, or Area C? Area A is controlled by the Palestinian Authority. It's the green, which is mainly cities. The Palestinian Authority administers civil and security matters there. It includes the cities of Ramallah, Bethlehem, Hebron, and Jericho. Area B, the PA administers only the civil matters, and that is Israel controls the security. In Area C, Israel maintains full control and includes all the Israeli settlements. And the idea with the Oslo Accords was eventually this might lead to some two-state solution. But it never happened. The Rabin was assassinated, as you know, in 1995. So this is the way it is today. 3 different areas, and different things happen in these different areas. But when they talk about the settlements, the Jewish settlements, they're talking about Area C, and not Area A or Area B. A little more history. 4 formal offers of a two-state solution, 1937, 1947, 2000, 2008. And one of land swap for peace. So I mentioned the Peel Commission in 1937, turned down by the Arabs. 1947, UN Resolution 181, turned down by the Arabs. 1967, there was a formal offer of land swap for peace. In the 2000 Camp David with President Clinton, Prime Minister Barack, and PLO leader Arafat turned down. And then in 2008, Prime Minister Omer with Abbas. The Arab response, no, 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 no. In 1967, after the Six-Day War, Israel offered to swap land for peace, and there was a famous conference in Khartoum, Sudan, which they published in writing their response in 67. No peace with Israel, no recognition with Israel, no recognition of the existence of Israel, no peace with Israel. Why the repeated Arab rejection of a two-state solution? The answer is they want all the land, not just a part. It's irrelevant how the map has been drawn. The Arab goal has always been no Jews in the Holy Land, a goal thought to be eventually attainable by war. The history is there for anyone to read and study. And again, any inherent bias can influence how you interpret this history. These are just a few of the books, and there are dozens more, that one can read about the history of Israel or the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And again, how you interpret the history is up to you. If you have time for just one book, I recommend this one, which was published a few years ago by Noah Tishby. She's a progressive, or left-wing, if you will, Israeli, who now lives in Hollywood. She works as a TV producer. Some of you may know her from her work as a producer of television shows. She wrote this book, and again, she's a progressive, so she's not a right-wing extremist or anything, but she gives a very clear and cogent history of the conflict. In 2022, she was appointed as Israel's first special envoy for combating anti-Semitism. In 2023, she came out against Netanyahu with his plan to redo the Supreme Court, and she was fired. So she has her, right. You want to read a fascinating novel that provides some history of the conflict. I wrote it. The story takes place in the year before 10/7/23 on an elite campus outside Chicago. It's in print and Kindle format. I have a copy on the table back there. It's also, they just put it in the local Barnes & Noble store. It gives a lot of the background leading up to the October 7th, 2023 massacre. So it's a novel, it's fiction, but the history it provides is not fiction. So it has both a love story and a story of conflict with some historical interest as well. Now we come to the October 7th, 2023 massacre in the Gaza Strip. Hamas, as everyone knows, killed 1,200 people, civilians, foreign nationals, and members of security forces. More Jews were killed on a single day since the Holocaust. About 250 hostages were taken. The extent of the invasion was between these two arrows, from Sidro down to Rayam, and all points in between, where thousands of Palestinians under Hamas crossed the border and slaughtered all those people. And that was in October 7th, just a little over a year ago. The Gaza Strip is small, 25 miles long, from 3.7 to 7 miles wide, and 141 square miles. So I think, last time I checked, I think the village is like 60 square miles, so it's about 3 times the size of the villages. So a brief timeline of the Gaza Strip. In 48-67, that is from the War of Independence to the 1967 war, it was controlled by Egypt. From 1967 to the 1990s, it was controlled by Israel. In 1994, the Palestinian Authority took control of security and civilian affairs, but Israeli citizens remained in the northern section. In 1997, the U.S. declared Hamas, which had been established previously, a terrorist organization because they were crossing the border with suicide bombers. They would threaten to kill all the Jews. It would announce itself its goals to get rid of all the Jews. And the United States declared it a terrorist organization. Under Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, in 2005, Israel pulled out of Gaza completely. They literally uprooted 9,000 Israelis and 25 settlements against their wishes. The Jews living there did not want to leave. They had a thriving farming going on, and they didn't want to leave. But Sharon felt that if they pulled all the Jews out, that Gaza would then have no excuse to attack Israel, that they would grow and they would prosper, and maybe even possibly become like another Singapore, an independent city-state. So he pulled out all the Jews in 2005. So there was an election for legislative council, and Hamas, again, a terrorist organization, according to the United States, won a majority over the Palestinian Authority. And then in 2007, Hamas took military control, forcing out the PA. And I don't say that lightly. If you read the history of this, PA leaders who were still remaining were literally thrown off rooftops to get rid of them. So they all had to, they were just kicked out completely. From 2007 to 2023, Israel and Egypt secured Gaza borders to keep out the terrorists. It's often forgotten or not mentioned that Egypt controls the southern border. And Egypt doesn't want the Palestinians coming over either because they recognize them as terrorists, as part of the old Muslim Brotherhood, and previously tried to take over Egypt. So Egypt has a very secure border on the southern border to keep out the Palestinian terrorists. Between 2007 and 2023, billions of dollars were sent to Gaza for aid, but used instead to build the tunnels, missile sites, and so forth. Hamas and Islamic Jihad sent thousands of missiles into Israel. Most stopped Israel's Iron Dome. In addition, there were 4 shorter wars between Israel and Gaza during this period, lasting up to a few weeks. And then on October 7th of last year, Hamas invaded Israel, massacred 1,200, and took 250 hostages. Certainly there have been miscalculations and failures by Israel. Before 2020, October 7th of 23, thousands of Gazans crossed the border daily to work in Israel, and they provided detailed maps to Hamas about vulnerable locations for an attack. In years up to 2023, the Israeli government's agreement to allow Qatar to fund Hamas in order to maintain a divide between Hamas and PLO in the West Bank. So this has been a very big criticism of Israel, allowing this to go on, to keep Hamas and PLO opposite, in opposition. Israel had an Iron Dome to prevent missiles, but no defense in place to prevent cross-border attacks. Finally, we now know that there were warnings of Hamas preparation, and they were ignored. Women in the base near Gaza border raised alarm long before October 7th, and apparently they were simply ignored or not taken seriously by the military. So that's Israel's miscalculations and failures. Sderot, which is the closest city to where the attacks took place, right here, just a mile or so away, is one of the locations attacked on October 7th. When we visited Sderot a few years ago, the emphasis of the locals was on the importance of quickly accessible bomb shelters. So there are bomb shelters everywhere, in bus stops, on schools, and playgrounds. This is an indoor playground that we visited, and here's a girl playing basketball. Right here is a bomb shelter. And so the emphasis was in the fact that the citizens of Sderot had 15 seconds to go into a shelter after the siren sound. So it was pointed out with pride that almost wherever you were in Sderot, there was a bomb shelter within a half a minute that you could get to. No one expressed concern about an over-the-border raid. And then the over-the-border raid came. So now we have the fact that we just learned this week that the leader of this raid, Hamas, was killed last Wednesday. Before he was killed, he boasted that he wanted more Gazans killed. His calculation was that the more civilians that would be killed, the better it would be for his goal of getting rid of Israel, because he knew that that would raise the ire of a worldwide country, particularly in the West. So did he achieve his goals? Disrupt efforts to normalize relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. That was certainly one of their goals, and that was achieved. It's on hold. Israel will retaliate and kill thousands of Gazans, sparking world outrage and unleash widespread anti-Semitism. He achieved that goal. Hezbollah will become involved and attack Israel. He achieved that goal. When Israel retaliates against Hezbollah, Iran will attack Israel, leading to a wider war. We know that's happened. So he achieved that goal. So you can say, though, that he didn't survive. He achieved those four goals, at least as of today. And the fifth goal, eventual destruction of Israel, the ultimate long-term goal of Hamas. And they've been quoted as saying, if it takes 100 years, that's our goal. And again, quoting Sinwar, doesn't matter how many Palestinians are killed in the process, or if it takes 100 years, that is the goal. Now, in the face of this brutal attack by U.S. recognized terrorist groups, how do we explain the pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel demonstrations? First of all, U.S. intelligence tells us that it's instigated, a lot of it's instigated or funded by Iran. Then, of course, there's the opportunity to display deep-seated anti-Semitism, no doubt widespread before October 7th. And of course, there's a blatant double standard. You don't see demonstrations against major abuses of human rights, Syria, Sudan, China, Venezuela, Iran, Afghanistan. No, just Israel. And finally, you can explain it by progressive idealism based on ignorance of the region's culture and history. Hamas's stated goals, people are often ignorant of those. Attempts at a two-state solution, people are often ignorant of those. The pay-for-slave program, people are often ignorant of those. Israel's Gaza pullout, a lot of people still think Israel is occupying Gaza, or has occupied Gaza physically inside the borders of Gaza, and the geography, ignorance of all of that. For example, from which river to which sea? An article in the Wall Street Journal last year polled college students, 250 students, Only 47% of the students who embraced the slogan were able to name the river and the sea. The Nile River, the Euphrates River, the Dead Sea, the Caribbean Sea, the Atlantic Ocean. Students were also ignorant of history and geography of the region. Less than 25% knew who Yasser Arafat was, and 12 of them thought he was the first prime minister of Israel. Feminists and LGBTQ, free Palestine, pro-Hamas, they would be welcomed to Israel and killed in Gaza. What about the pro-Palestinian support among Jewish groups, which there are several? These are two of the most prominent ones: Jews for Justice for Palestinians and Jewish Voice for Peace. Plus, as you know, many Jewish college students are pro-Palestinian. How do you explain this when the Palestinian leaders would have them killed if given the opportunity? Willful ignorance of the region's history and the stated goals of radicalism. I've already mentioned that. A strong belief in social justice that blinds them to reality. Finally, support Palestinians ignores the role of Hamas in the plight of the Palestinians. In Gaza, no freedom of speech or of the press, plus theft of billions of dollars of foreign aid to build missiles and tunnels. Why aren't they campaigning against Hamas? Rhetorical question. What about the disproportionate death toll in Gaza? A major rallying point against Israel and false claims of genocide. Statistics quoted are from Hamas and never confirmed independently. But there's no escaping the fact that thousands of innocent non-combatants, especially children, have been killed in Gaza, which, sad to say, is Hamas's goal. That's why Hamas set up its missiles in the hospitals, schools, and so forth. That Hamas cares nothing for Gaza's civilian population is always ignored by the demonstrators against Israel, both Jewish and non-Jewish. Now, there are multiple opinions about how Israel should be conducting the war, but it's important to note it is a war declared by Hamas, and as long as Hamas exists, Sinwar promised to repeat the attacks of October 7th. War always kills innocent civilians. See Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Dresden. Protests demanding ceasefire never provide a realistic alternative to prevent further Hamas attacks. To repeat, Hamas promises by Sinwar and presumably by the new leaders to continue the attack unless they literally were completely obliterated. But the fact is, war is hell on both the Israeli side and Gaza side. There's no getting around it. When you're attacked, what is the right proportion of civilian deaths? 9/11, 2,977 civilians were killed. The U.S. response in Afghanistan, 70,000 civilians killed. August 1945, was this a proportionate response to the war in Japan? Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Another issue seldom discussed: what if Israel disappeared and the Palestinians won? With the various Arab factions in the Holy Land, 3 of them designated terrorist organizations by the U.S., some Sunni, some Shia, would they agree on governance? Or would they start a war among themselves for political control, as happened in Gaza in 2007? Who can negotiate a lasting peace agreement for all the Palestinians? Most likely result will be another Arab war, with thousands or tens of thousands more Arabs killed. It's a mess, but from my perspective, the war in Gaza could have ended quickly if a coalition of threatened countries had acted quickly or early. Other countries at risk from the rise of Islamic terrorism: Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, United Arab Emirates, Britain, France, Germany, the U.S., could have formed a coalition, go into Gaza and quickly eliminate Hamas, then set up a provisional government. They still could do it. That is, if they truly cared about helping the Palestinians of Gaza. But they don't, and that's the tragedy. The U.S. ended 3 wars with much less threat to the country than exists now in the Middle East. Moreover, unlike South Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, Israel can survive and remain a true democracy on its own. It just needs to eliminate Iran-sponsored Arab strongholds on its borders, whose singular goal is to destroy the country. Okay, I know what you're thinking, at least that's what I put in. Am I crazy? that the U.S. and other countries should enter the war in Gaza. You're thinking that, right? It was not deemed crazy to form a coalition in the 1991 Gulf War when 42 countries came to the aid of Kuwait after Iraq invaded. The Central Command was led by the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Great Britain. It was not deemed crazy for a coalition of 60 countries, including the United States, to join Iraq in retaking the city of Mosul from ISIS in 2016 and 2017. The coalition commanded one of the most significant urban combats since World War II. The risk of not intervening to help end Israel's war with Iran is a far bigger threat to the United States than it was North Vietnam, Iraq, or Afghanistan. Not intervening also increases the threat to Middle East countries willing to live in peace with Israel, especially Saudi Arabia. Currently willing to live in peace are Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and Jordan, and never Iran, Hezbollah, and its proxies. And it's well known that the Sunni in Saudi Arabia have been in a constant battle with the Shia in Iran for years. And the biggest threat to Saudi Arabia currently is Iran, especially if they get a bomb, atomic bomb. So not intervening is not only a threat to the United States, but also to the Saudi Arabia and other Middle East countries willing to live in peace. The Iran-Israel war, which I now call it, that's really what it is, the Iran-Israel war, is not just a Middle East problem. Members of the Iranian parliament chant, "Death to America, death to America, death to America." You can go on YouTube and just put in "Death to America, Iran," you can hear them chant it incessantly. Death to America. It's not just death to Israel, it's death to America. The parallel to the 1930s is ominous. Hitler began to kill all the Jews and no one cared. But he didn't stop there. The result was World War II. 70 to 80 million people killed. Civilians, 50 to 55 million. Military, 20 to 25 million. And 407,000 U.S. military deaths. Israel's war against Israel is just the opening salvo of a war against the West. Iran, Russia, China, and North Korea versus the Western democracies. Hitler was ignored and then he was appeased. The U.S. should not make the same mistake with Iran. And this is the famous picture of Chamberlain, peace for our time, September 1938, after he negotiated the Munich Pact with Hitler, agreeing not to attack Europe after he got the state land. Peace in our time. If we look upon now as a folly, it was a joke, as insane, but back then it was believed. Okay, a few more slides and I'm done. Thank you for your patience. Israel's not perfect. The country has a lot of self-made problems, political and otherwise. It's no angel when confronted with terrorists and missile attacks from Arab-controlled territories. Israel has one overriding goal, to survive as a free and independent Jewish state. To do so, Israel must continue to deal with the fact that it's surrounded by enemies who wish to destroy it and get rid of all the Jews. There is nothing Israel alone can do to end the IP conflict. It's not an issue of what to do with Gaza after the war ends. People make that a big deal. It's not an issue of West Bank settlements or how Palestinians are governed in the West Bank. People make that a big deal. It's not. It's not an issue about changing Israel's borders back to 1967. It's not an issue of what type of government Israel has, left, right, or center. It's not an issue of how Israel retaliates when attacked, proportionate or disproportionate, or the collateral damage that results. The only real issue at the root of the conflict is Israel's existence, a fact that will forever lead the conflict as long as radical jihadists have any power in the Middle East. What's needed is to eliminate the puppet master of the terrorist proxies, the rabidly anti-Semitic Iranian regime, otherwise the U.S. remains at risk. Take out all the infrastructure that supports Iran's atomic bomb program. When Iran gets the atomic bomb, it is just as likely to be used in the United States as in Israel. It won't be sent by missiles. More likely, suicide terrorists will sneak it in somehow, perhaps on a container ship, into New York's harbor. Unlikely, you might think. What did we think about 9/11? We thought that was unlikely, but it happened. Of course, Iran will deny any involvement, blame Russia or China or North Korea, and inevitably the U.S. will retaliate and then perhaps World War III. If you agree Iran is a threat to the United States, what would you recommend? Since Israel is determined to remain Jewish and sovereign, and has the military muscle to stay that way, the solution to the conflict lies with the Palestinians and the Iranian support. The only solution to the conflict is a radical change in the Middle East. This is highly unlikely to occur anytime soon. You need a revolution in Iran to replace the current Israel must be destroyed Ayatollahs. We need new Palestinian leaders who truly seek peace and not the destruction of Israel, and who can unite political factions in Gaza and the West Bank, and avoid being assassinated. We need to eliminate Hamas, Hezbollah, and Islamic Jihad. Eliminate UNRWA, an absurd claim of 6 million refugees. We have to have the Arabs decide how best to govern themselves in Gaza and the West Bank, whether by forming a nation, aligning with Jordan or some other country, or simply remaining independent territory devoid of terrorists. Whatever agreement, the Palestinians must not be governed by radical jihadists whose singular goal is destruction of Israel. If the Arabs put down their weapons today, there would be no more violence. If the Jews put down their weapons today, there would be no more Israel. Said many years ago, and still true today. You cannot negotiate peace with someone who has come to kill you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Larry. Now I'll open it for questions and comments that I hope will be reasoned. There's no trite saying that history may not repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And I hope all of you understand that we all happen to be beneficiaries of settler colonialism, because that's what happened.
One question I have is that when you showed the photograph of some Arab Muslim leader meeting with Hitler who wanted to kill all the Jews in the Holy Land, and then within a minute or two or three you were stating that since all the Palestinians want to kill all the Jews, and that was a big leap. Just because one guy said he wanted to kill all the Jews, that doesn't mean that all the Palestinians wanted to kill all the Jews. I have heard individually, and rare, I'm sure they're rare, Israelis who said they would like to see all the Gazans killed, because that would eliminate the problem. It's the only way to eliminate the problem is to kill them all. But I don't think that that shows that all the Israeli Jews feel that way. So, do you have any statistics to back up your jump from that guy with Hitler saying he wanted to kill all the Jews to your conclusion that the Palestinians wanted to kill all the Jews?
The same set the tone for future leaders of Palestinians. The future leaders of the Palestinians want all the Jews eliminated. I didn't say they want all the Jews killed. They want all the Jews out of the Holy Land. So I'm talking about the leaders of the factions, PLO, PA, Gaza. The leaders of these factions' goal is to have no Jews in the Holy Land. Clearly, if you could poll the Palestinians in Gaza or in West Bank, and you could get their opinions without them worrying about being killed or marginalized, they would probably say they want peace. But I'm talking about leaders who are controlled. There's no freedom of press. There's no freedom of speech. You cannot speak your mind. So all we know is what the leaders say, and the leaders want all the Jews gone. I'm not saying they would literally go in and want to kill them all. They'd be very happy if they all got on a boat and went west on the Mediterranean. So I'm talking about the leaders of these factions.
Yeah, but in the presentation, you did say all Palestinians were out. You didn't say
Okay, I'll fix that.
Thank you, Larry. Iran. When and why did Iran become involved with Israel? After all, Iran is Persian and not Arab, and their language, Farsi, is not Arabic. Is it a Middle East obligation of theirs, or is it complete anti-Semitism?
I don't know, I mean, I think since the Ayatollahs took over many years ago, that they are very anti-Semitic, and they began stabbing in these proxies, decades ago. So, whether it's anti-Semitism or whether Iran just wants hegemony over the entire Middle East, which politically is what I think they want, Israel stands in the way. They can't control the Middle East, and they can't get at Saudi Arabia on, if Israel stands in the way. So I think that's part of it.
Isn't one of Iran's main motivations that they see themselves as protectors of the Shiite minorities that are persecuted by the Sunni majorities in the rest of Arabia and the Middle East? They just see themselves as protectors. What's being attacked in the Lebanon was where their first Shiite religion was born. They see that as a very holy place for Iran. Would you like to comment on what the role of the being protectors of the Shiite does to the Iranians?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? It was garbled.
Oh, okay. He was asking that Iran, paraphrasing you, why don't you, that Iran's principal thing is to be a bastion of defense for the Shia sect of Islam.
Being persecuted.
And that it's, obviously it's a minority, was it 10% as opposed to 90% Sunni. And that translates into much of their foreign policy, if you will.
Where Hezbollah is one of the most holy places for the Shiites, because that's where their religion was born. The first Shiites who came to convert Iran came from the area that's now being attacked by Israel.
I mean, I'm not sure I understand, but Hezbollah is Shia, and in Gaza, Hamas is Sunni. And so, Iran had more political connection with Hezbollah than with Hamas. But I think that the Sunni Shia thing is another layer of complexity, because I think that if Israel disappeared, there would be a war between Sunni and Shia. But I'm not sure I'm answering your question, because I don't think I fully understand what you're asking.
I'm just saying there was a very strong religious motivation to what Iran does.
Yes.
It's support of the Houthis, it's supporting an oppressed,
Okay.
what they see
Right.
as an oppressed Shiite minority. When they defend with Hezbollah, they see that as defending the birthplace of their religion.
Right. I think that what would happen
It's not necessarily a desire to terrorize the world. They see it as, one man's terrorist is another man's defender, liberator. I'm just saying there is that dynamic.
There's no doubt that if it came down between Hezbollah and Hamas, and Iran had a say, Hezbollah would dominate, because they're Shia, and they're more in bed with Iran. There's no doubt about that. That's why I said if Israel disappeared, there would be an Arab war in that Holy Land. It would not be peace at all, I don't believe.
You proposed a theoretical solution to the problem. I think you would concede that your theoretical solution is probably very unlikely to be implemented. How do you see this whole thing finally ending?
I don't have an answer for that. I really don't know. I don't know. I honestly believe there should be a coalition that goes in, just as one example, which I didn't go into. I think if a coalition started out from the very beginning, they could have convinced Egypt to set up a gigantic refugee area in the Sinai, where all the Gazans who wanted to could go there and escape Israel's attacks, with a promise that they'd be able to come back. But Egypt was completely against that, and the United States, in my understanding, did nothing to convince Egypt to let them come across. And I think if that had been done at the very beginning, they could have evacuated Gaza, then the coalition could have gone in and eliminated Hamas. And when I say coalition, I don't mean just the United States. The United States with willing Arab countries, with Western European countries, and gone in and just said, where is Sinwar? Let's go get them. It could have been done very quickly. And they did this in Mosul, and they did this in Kuwait, and they could have done it in Gaza, but they just didn't care enough to do it. And I really strongly feel a coalition could have prevented the tens of thousands of Gazan deaths that have resulted since the war began. That's just my opinion.
Thank you. So, your solution, I also think, is pretty unlikely. Probably more likely is a financial and political collapse of Egypt. And I think that could happen much sooner. And how would that, with a takeover by Muslim Brotherhood and even worse kinds of people, how is that going to affect Israel?
I'm sorry, why do you think Egypt's going to collapse?
Well, because they have no financial basis. They're living on loans from the Western powers, and they can't pay that back. It's going to result in tremendous inflation and instability.
So you're saying Hamas is going to take more?
I think internal dissension and
Well, the Muslim Brotherhood is like,
will depose Sisi.
I don't know, I didn't know about that.
And I just assume you didn't bring up the possibility of loans that can't be paid back on a national basis.
Boy, are we in a mess. And, I go back into history thousands of years ago, and the Jews seems to be the prevailing group that is responsible for everything else in terms of human behavior. And why are we so pissed off at those people who started things for us as human? Humanism is a great place. It shows us the difference between good and bad, which is very important. In order to determine which is bad and which is good, you need both. As an example, if everybody was told, told people, going back to Judaism and the killing, we, humanity, mea culpa, we are responsible for killing one another, and we're not going to stop by sitting down in a nice environment and decide the future of the next door. So what is the answer to that? Well, the answer to that is education. We have to know where we're coming from and trying to determine where the hell we are going and how we're going there. And what is the reason why the Jews, who have contributed so much to humanity and its history, is picked on? Because they are used as a scapegoat. But we have to wake up and organize ourselves and educate ourselves instead of sitting down with all kinds of people and devise all kinds of things that don't work and kill one another the next day.
Thank you, Rick.
You're welcome.
So I'll take one. It was a very good talk. You had mentioned Jews for Palestine and gays for Palestine. You forgot to mention another group that makes about as much sense, and that's chickens for KFC.
Well, some chickens are more equal than others.
Larry, thank you so much, man. The depth of your talk and precision is just magnificent in my opinion. Anyway, one of the things I was thinking about is at some time, maybe around the time that the Jews were banned from America on the 700 people on the boat, there was a huge discussion in our Congress in that area sometime about who we should support. You know, should it be the Arabs or the Jews? And if I remember right, it came down just to 1 or 2 votes, and we almost did not support Israel. Do you have any information on that?
No, I know the vote to make Israel a state in the United Nations was close, and Truman was very supportive of Israel. The discussion in Congress...
He's got to move his mic down.
In 39, was years earlier, that was 39. I wasn't aware of any discussion in Congress. My impression was that Roosevelt was being influenced by his anti-Semitic cabinet, not let the Jews in, because it pissed off the Arabs. I don't know about that congressional discussion.
Can you reposition your mic and kind of
Pull it down, pull the mic down.
I'm sorry, what?
Pull the mic down.
You're being recorded for posterity. That's what they're trying to do.
Okay, thank you. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
please speak into the mic for your comment or question.
Larry, my name is Ali. I am probably the only Arab Muslim in this room. I have lived through the 3 wars that you mentioned. And I can tell you, you are full of shit. You are misinformed.
Hold it. That's not acceptable.
Okay, you are misinformed, and you are very biased in what you say. Your proposed solution is completely wrong. There are 7 or 8 items that you mentioned there. None of them are possible in today's world, economy, or politics.
What is your solution?
Okay. Unfortunately, sir, I am an American, and I do not have a solution. There is no solution to what we face today. There is no solution other than the fact, I want to remind you that every time you said the word terrorist, there are 2 billion other people out there that consider them freedom fighters.
Certainly true. There may not be a solution, but there will be an outcome.
I think the solution is for Israel to surrender to the United States and become our 51st state with a bilingual state government. Second of all, okay, I wanted to mention that you mentioned genocide, war crimes, and a couple of other categories that were defined differently by Israelis and their Arab opponents. And one of the categories that I'm more interested in now is war crimes and crimes against humanity, which there is proceedings going on as we speak. So that's what I'd like to know about.
You're not going to solve war crimes for us, Larry?
Thank you, Larry. That was very educational. I have a solution. The solution is to realize that the range of human emotions hasn't changed since Cain slew Abel. The range of emotions is pretty much the same. The only thing that really has changed is technology. Moses didn't have a microphone. See, I do. That's technology. We're at the cusp of new technology so that we can create a new cloud of DNA that would be released on the peoples of Gaza and Israel, and it would make all their progeny children half Jewish and half Arab. And like the Bible teaches, when you have a baby and the 2 alleged mothers are fighting over it, and God offers a solution of cutting the baby in half, the good mother says, no, let the bad brother have the baby.
That's fascinating and comes into the whole philosophical argument, which goes beyond this of how our cultural development of humanity has not matched its technological development. Also, who is going to guard the self-same guardians that decide how the DNA is divided?
I'm Marsha. I enjoyed your talk a lot. And I think Israel should have oversight in Gaza for at least 10 years after this war, as well as the educational system. I think that's very important because through these years in all the primary schools, they're taught about annihilating Israel, and I think education is primary. Thank you.
Well, I'm Jane Goldsmith. I'm Paul's first half, and he had to call me because otherwise no din. I have a couple of comments. One is that your talk was wonderful, but short, because we should cover the Crusades. When Western Europe invaded the Arab areas, took over Jerusalem, killed everybody they could, and 400 years of war and rule. And I believe that all the Arabs remember that. And when George Bush said, oh, it's a new crusade, everybody's hackles rose. It's like, oh no, not that again. We already went through that. So I feel that the crusades set the tone, not just for hatred of Jews, but Jews were migrating into the area. And here they come again, invading our homeland. So I feel like that's important. Another thing I wanted to mention is when we give a bunch of money for war, we're not sending our soldiers, or maybe not many of them, to the Ukraine or to Israel. It's like, what happens to that money? We give $2 billion to Ukraine, and Ukraine then buys the weapons from us. So here's our tax dollar or our national debt going to Ukraine and then coming to the masters of war. The masters of war are getting the money. And of course, we're all involved in going in these stocks, the iron, the steel, the munitions. I mean, if we would just stop all our war manufacture, we would all have to pay a big price. So it's kind of this grinding thing on. We give the money. And then finally, as a statistician, I went to a quality control talk at the National Statistical Meeting several years ago, and I was dumbfounded. It was about quality control of weapons. So here we have this big stockpile, the best, supposedly, which I believe is the best military in the world. You can't send these people into war with bombs that don't go off, bullets that won't shoot, missiles that won't fire, that won't land right. I know I'm talking to the right crowd here. Things that get really old tend not to work anymore. And so there's this big program of quality control of our armaments. It costs a fortune. They have to go out and test the missiles and test the bombs. Because you can't send them into war with stuff that's not going to go off. And
You don't have to, Ben. You don't have to.
It's that eventually, if we have a long period of peace in this country, the price goes up. More and more of our weapons are old. They have to be tested. And then if they're not working at a certain rate, then they have to destroy them and carefully dispose of them. So you get a situation where pre-war, we've got all these missiles that are about to go out of date. I mean, we can have a war for free, but we're going to have to replace them anyhow, and we're going to have to go through and test them and dispose of them. So the pre-war comes in, and then, so that's my I wanted to impart that. I hadn't thought of that myself. So as an American, I'm thinking, well, forget the free war for us. Let's give these old missiles and stuff to the Ukraine. I mean, they're just about to expire. How about Israel? Send them the old stuff, and we can do all the new stuff. And it's going to be a freebie because we're going to have to pay the money anyway. So this is a concern, the impetus toward building weapons and selling.
Yes, indeed. Sell the old ones and build new ones. It's disturbing to me how right Dwight Eisenhower was. Beware the military-industrial complex.
Good afternoon. It's Larry.
Honey?
Larry?
Yeah.
Larry, first time I heard...
They don't have
Okay, can you hear me now? First time I heard...
As they come by, tell them not to.
The sea
was in Syria during David's purging, putting his enemies out of the Holy Land, as you discussed it. And they wanted to push them into the sea, from the river to the sea. That's the first time I heard of it. That's what, 2,000 years ago? That's based on some religious belief. And you mentioned the Islam. Islam came to be, what, 1,400 years ago, Islam, you mentioned that Islam, another religion, and then there became this conflict between Judaism and Islam. Where it started, I don't think we can say at this point, can you? Then you talked about when the Jewish people, the pogroms in Europe, which were in the, actually they probably went on from ever to ever, all right? They may be still going on there, for that matter. But you mentioned about them in the 1800s. They started to try to let Jewish people try to start leaving Europe, migrating then to the Middle East. And the Ottoman Empire was controlled it then. I just read a book of the end of the Ottoman Empire and the Jews and the Palestinians. And one thing, Palestine was called Palestine way before 1940s, I believe, at least in the history that I read. But my question is, this all seems to go to religion, the basis of it, the basis of these, are you saying, no, I am not. I was wondering if you could read a red flag. The basis,
I'll start keeping the time.
well, all right. So the basis of it seems to be religion, and that is a complex issue. How do you suggest we solve the problem of these wars in the Middle East, considering that it's all religion? I mean, you look at the right wing of the Israelis and their government. I mean, you didn't mention them. Their hands aren't clean in this, are they? And clearly, Iran's hands aren't clean. But if it's the basis of it is their religion, I don't know. How do you solve the problem? How do you suggest it, other than what you've already suggested, that we just go in and bomb Iran?
You can't solve inbred hatred. What you have to do is have a strong Israel with other countries right surrounding, can't destroy it, send missiles and other things. So if Saudi Arabia and Israel can have a peace agreement, if Jordan and Israel can have a peace agreement, if Egypt and Israel can have a peace agreement with different religions, then why can't the surrounding proxies of Iran have a peace agreement? In other words, it's possible, but the jihadists want to destroy Israel and get rid of all the Jews. So the problem is definitely religion is the basis, but it really comes down to political and desire to get rid of Israel. So it's very complex, but it's possible, but it just requires all those steps I mentioned on that slide of getting rid of the Ayatollahs, the anti-Israel Ayatollahs, getting leaders of the Palestinians who aren't terrorists, who aren't jihadists, and all those other things. So it's possible. But religion is clearly, it's always going to be there. It's things that have to all be decided. I mean, it's,
I look at what's happening in Is he finished? I look at what's happening in the military situation. That's where most of my experience is. And I see that our administration, and Europe even more, are pressing to stop supplying Israel with the weapons they need. Now, I go back to the 1973 war. I was very familiar with what happened. And what I'm going to say is probably unclassified now. The United States, State Department in particular, wanted to prevent sending any more bombs, bullets, any more ammunition to Israel. They were running out. They were running out. The strategic plan was started at one point because Israel, and this is now unclassified, I believe, Israel deployed nuclear weapons next to delivery systems, aircraft. Immediately, Nixon said, send them the bombs, send them the bullets. And the strategic airlift started. It was absolutely unbelievable how rapidly. This could happen now. Israel will not go down quietly, and they can make a big noise. And we need to understand that. These are people who are facing extinction, and they have means to defend themselves with our support, just providing them the material they need. If we don't do that, and if the Europeans don't do that, prevent us from doing that, things can get much, much worse. Much, much worse.
I agree.
You mentioned at the beginning the current population breakdown in the Holy Land, but you didn't mention what it was after World War II. And it's my understanding that the Jewish population in the Holy Land was at that time only about 1/3, and that the Arab Muslims made up the clear majority. Do you agree with that?
I think that's true, yes.
So it would seem that the creation of a Jewish state would be contrary to what the majority wanted, contrary to the idea of a plebiscite or a democracy or whatever, and that is what has given rise, this sense of injustice, given rise to all the hatred against Israel, because they were not a majority at the time. They simply were a minority that had greater power, took control, and then they allowed in immigration only of their own kind. And that's why so many Muslims are pissed off at Israelis and Jews, because they feel they got cheated. So, what do you think?
It's your opinion.
Well,
they only got part of the land, a small part of the land in the UN Resolution 181. The Arabs got most of the land, and the idea was to try to have, two separate nations, and the Arabs wanted all the land. So they didn't want to live with the Jews.
Yeah, well, this is the issue of minorities assuming control and squashing the others is also pertinent today.
So I'm curious, and maybe you're not a military expert here, but some kind of impending attack by Israel upon Iran. What might that look like, and what would success look like? Do you really think that this wouldn't simply encourage Iranians to be even more angry at Israel?
It's a good question. I don't know. I have no idea how they would do it. Whether they would just target the oil fields, or where they think the bombs are being made. I don't know. I don't think anyone knows.
Larry, thank you. There's a lot to unwind here. A few things, facts. What the territory looked like post-World War is frankly difficult to define. In 1937, when the Peel Commission actually decided how the maps would be drawn, and the United Nations in 1947, 10 years later, actually defined what the maps looked like, what they actually did was they looked where people actually lived and the areas that they dominated in. That's how those maps were constructed. They didn't just, willy-nilly, randomly draw lines on a map. It was very, very specific. It was very targeted. If the Jews lived in this area, it probably makes sense because they have invested, they've developed that area, and they've been living there for a long time. Same thing with the Arabs. And you'll notice the 1937 map only had Israel as small part on the top of that land, the mandate itself. And in 1947, some of it changed because the demographics changed in the area itself. With regards to what somebody else said, with regards to Iran, you're dealing with a, I don't know how to say it, a genocidal, theocratic government living in the 7th century trying to recreate the Persian Empire. If you don't understand that, mind you, okay, you don't know what's going on, okay? They want all the land, okay, in the Middle East if they can. It's not because the religion started in Lebanon, which is true, by the way, someone mentioned that. But it's a much bigger picture than that. That's why they have these. And do the Persians care how many Arabs died supporting their theology? No. The answer is no, because they're not the ones fighting.
Thank you.
Yeah. Larry, you want to make any comment?
No, I agree. I mean, he's right.
Yeah. Well, the issue, you know, let's not, it doesn't do much good to say someone has a theology that goes back 1,000 years when they have the technology. Their theology may be ancient, but their technology is not.
Thank you, Bo. In homage to Bo, he once gave a talk on logical fallacies, and there's 2 logical fallacies I've heard. One is ethical, the fallacy of, to me, of majority versus minority ethics, as to Israel only having 1/3 of the population versus 2/3. And we're founded on the Bill of Rights, which give rights to the minority. It's not considered ethically moral for the majority to rule of depriving essential rights to any minority. Certainly their elimination and total destruction. And that's a one-sided argument. The second logical fallacy in the spirit of Bo was a statement about sending money to Ukraine. And that's, money makes the world go round. It's an important fallacy. When you think money is a one-way street, it's more important to view the circulation of money than who has it at this moment. Money that went to Ukraine, as an example, the argument is given, many of it comes back to the United States, since that money is then used to feed companies in the United States, and that money gets distributed. A dollar bill circulates 100 times in 1 year. It's who is part of the circulation that's more important than who has it right now.
That's enough about the multiplier effect. Okay. I think, you know, the concept of, we make this mistake all the time as Americans, to think that our values, majority rule, minority rights, that's not borne out in history. There's really no historical precedent for that. Just as there's no good historical precedent for saying that you don't have a state religion. Okay? These are new things.
Could you repeat that, please?
About
the state religion.
Oh, in fact, throughout human history, for the most part, you have had within a given, what we would call state, kingdom, realm, you've had a religion that you either adhered to or pretended to adhere to because it was in your best interest to do so. Okay? So we're new in a sense, historically. And well, that history will decide whether it's good or not. You know, we're still finding out. Sorry.
We're done, right?
Huh?
We're done?
I'm certainly done.
No, I mean, I think we're over.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you.
That was great. Appreciate it.